Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. And to start with, we do have some fire weather concerns that have cropped up in the Copper River Basin. We do have a red flag warning, expecting strong winds with, south winds 20 to 30 miles along the Copper River itself, with humidities dropping down at 25 to 30% range. And that's going to be for tomorrow through Friday. So there's going to be a lot of problems there. Be careful about open burning and stuff like that. And then also in the Mat-Su Valley up in the Palmer-Wasilla area, as well as the Anchorage area on the hillside for Friday, where we do have concerns about the winds increasing as well as humidities dropping to that 25 to 30% range in those areas. And that's for Friday. So those are things that we're kind of paying attention to right now. So what's going on to fuel this weather, so to speak? Well, to start with, we'll start with the satellite imagery over the North Pacific and putting the loop in motion. This system right here that's south of the Alaska Peninsula is the one that's going to be pushing the front on up into the North Gulf Coast, but we'll talk about that in the next satellite loop. Now, what's going on in the northern portions of the state? Well, there's high pressure in the Bering Sea with this trough extending to the Seward Peninsula and also just up off the Arctic coast. You kind of see the clouds trailing down from there, and that was responsible for some snow earlier today along the northwest Arctic coast. Now taking a look at our GOES satellite imagery over the state of Alaska itself. We'll put the loop in motion, and here's, this isn't quite the front. The front's down here, but this is all going to be moving on up to Kodiak Island eventually, and then the North Gulf Coast. Increasing the pressure gradient across these regions, and also a trough of low pressure across the interior. The combination of the two with this weak ridge between the two is going to push southerly winds and then also easterly winds across the Chugach Mountains, and that's where that concern lies for those increased fire danger conditions. Taking a look at the loop one more time, one of the things to note is the convection that was kind of popping up in the late afternoon over the interior portions of the state. Even some isolated thunderstorm activity was occurring in those areas. Taking a look at the map for today, high pressure over the interior to the Gulf of Alaska. Now, there was a little bit of fog down in that Dixon Entrance region, but otherwise southeast Alaska generally sunny. Same thing with the south central region, the eastern interior, right on over towards southwestern Alaska. Up towards the Arctic coast, we do have our low pressure system up here with a weak frontal boundary extending down along the coast, and that was producing some rain over Barrow to the Dead Horse area, but a mixture of rain and snow west of Barrow was occurring during the day today. We did have fog concerns down through the Bering Strait and the St. Lawrence Island area to just north of the Nunivak Island region. Taking a look at our system that's coming up south of the peninsula, here's the frontal boundary pushing on up. That's pushing rain on up into the, was pushing rain into the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutian Islands over towards Dutch Harbor. Central Aleutian Islands generally were just cloudy, and then out to the west, foggy conditions with that high pressure ridge extending down from the Bering Sea across that area. Taking a look now at tonight's forecast. Our low pressure system stays south of the Dutch Harbor area, but the front is being pushed north. Still have our high pressure in the Gulf of Alaska with the ridge extending along the eastern Gulf of Alaska, and also low pressure over basically the central to eastern Brooks Range. Now with this ridge of high pressure over this region, expect some foggy conditions in the outer coastal areas of southeast Alaska. Otherwise, generally clear conditions in the northern Panhandle to the North Gulf Coast over the south central region, and even expect some clear conditions to persist down in the Bristol Bay area. In the interior with our low pressure system there, some isolated thunderstorm activity in that upper Yukon Valley into the evening hours, otherwise a scattered shower activity there. Rain along the eastern portions of the Brooks Range to the central Brooks Range, and then over the Arctic coast, basically from Barrow to the west, expect some snow showers, but little to no accumulation with that. some fog down through the Bering Strait to the St. Lawrence Island area, right down to the Nunivak Island region and even into the Pribilof Islands. Rain is going to persist along the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutians. Still only expecting cloudy conditions over the central Aleutians with some rain out into the western Aleutian Islands associated with this low pressure system. Taking a look at the forecast now for Thursday. This low pressure system in the interior has a cold front that's going to be extending to the southwest. Along that frontal boundary in the late afternoon, some isolated thunderstorm activity can be expected in this region of the state. Up along the Arctic coast with the main low pressure system responsible for all this, expect snow showers with that system basically from Barrow to the east. The western Arctic coast should see generally just cloudy conditions. And these snow showers should likely become mixed with rain showers late in the afternoon, rain showers over the eastern Arctic coast. Along the North Gulf Coast and the eastern Gulf of Alaska, this ridge of high pressure is persisting there. Clouds are going to be pushing inland over southeast Alaska. Expect clear conditions to persist in the Copper River Basin down through the Kenai Peninsula to Bristol Bay. And then we have our system continuing to push moisture into the Alaska Peninsula, spreading that towards Kodiak Island. So expect rain in the southern portions of Kodiak Island, continuing along the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutian Islands, and even spreading into the central Aleutian Islands. Out into the western Aleutian Islands, we're also going to see some rain or showers with this trailing trough from that low pressure system going on up into that extreme western Bering Sea. Taking a look now at the forecast for Friday. We still have this front across the interior, essentially a trough of low pressure, and this combined with this ridge kind of being pushed and building in along the North Gulf Coast or persisting there, and this front coming up, we're going to see that southerly push that we typically do, especially in the Copper River Basin. Gusty, strong south winds around 30 miles an hour blowing up the Copper River Valley itself. With low humidities, that's going to really increase the fire danger there. Same thing in the Matanuska Valley and even across the Anchorage hillside. The fuels are still relatively dry. Green up hasn't happened there, so that is still a concern. Rain is going to be just off the coast of the south side of the Kenai Peninsula, persisting in the Kodiak Island area as well as over towards the Alaska Peninsula. Showers trailing this front basically over the eastern Aleutian Islands with some showers just south of the Aleutian Islands themselves. There's a slight change, may see a shower or two along the Aleutian Island chain, but generally expect cloudy conditions there. Up along the Arctic coast, we still have our low pressure system kind of exiting to the east, but generally speaking, some scattered shower activity on the north slopes of the Brooks Range, and you may even see some isolated to scattered mixed rain and snow showers over the western Arctic coast. Taking a look at temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska was generally in the 50s. Along the North Gulf Coast, generally in the 50s as well, to the low 60s in the Sound. 60-degree readings through the Copper River Basin. Rather warm conditions in the south central area. Even some areas getting as high as 70 degrees. That didn't quite make it on the map, but the upper 60s to low 70s there. Eastern interior, generally mid to upper 60s there. And then over the, as we come down into the Kuskokwim Valley, mid to upper 60s in that region. Moving up to the northern portions of the state along the Arctic coast, generally in the mid-30s to mid-40s there, mid-50s along the Brooks Range. Over towards the Seward Peninsula, mid-30s to mid-40s there as well as the Yukon River Delta, although we did see some temperatures getting into the low 50s there. Moving down to the southwest portion of the state in Bristol Bay, rather warm conditions there, mid to upper 60s. And then much cooler conditions over the Alaska Peninsula where the clouds and rain were only in the 40s there. Same thing for the Pribilof Islands, although they weren't raining, they were very cloudy, 40-degree readings in that area. And the Aleutian Islands generally in the 40s, although we did get up to about 54 degrees over in that Atka area. Taking a look at our lows for tonight, expect temperatures in southeast Alaska to be into the mid-40s, upper 30s by Yakutat, mid-40s across the south central region as well as most of the interior. The Arctic coast should see temperatures dropping down to the freezing mark there. The Seward Peninsula, generally temperatures are going to stay in the low 30s to low 40s. 40-degree readings prevalent along the southwest portion of the state, although Nunivak Island into the upper 30s. 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands, and then 40s along the length of the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our highs for tomorrow. Southeast Alaska generally in the upper 50s to the low 60s. Upper 50s to low 60s towards Prince William Sound. In the south central region, expect temperatures to be in the mid 60s to even near 70 up into the Susitna Valley. The eastern interior, expect your temperatures generally to be in the mid to upper 60s. You may even see a 70-degree reading on the upper Yukon Valley. Warm conditions extending right on down the Yukon River Valley and as well as the Kuskokwim Valley in the mid to upper 60s there. If we move on up towards the Brooks Range, temperatures generally in the 40s and 50s, 30s to low 40s along the Arctic coast. On the Seward Peninsula, 40s on the north side of the peninsula, 50s on the Norton Sound side. And then moving on down to southwest Alaska, temperatures generally in the low 60s in the Bristol Bay Area, 50s along the Alaska Peninsula, 40s as we move on out to the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Pribilof Islands, as well as 40s along the Aleutian Islands with highs near 50 in the Atka area. Taking a look now at flying weather around the state for tomorrow. On the Arctic coast, marginal to IFR conditions can be expected there. Expect marginal to IFR conditions, generally marginal conditions across Kodiak Island, IFR on the south side of the island just offshore there. Same thing for the Alaska Peninsula, IFR conditions on the south side, marginal over the remainder of the area. Marginal conditions prevalent throughout the Bering Sea as well as the Aleutian Islands, and VFR throughout the remainder of the state. For our passes, expect marginal conditions for Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Path. Moving on down to the Alaska Range, expect VFR conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Path as well as Rainy Path. Windy Pass, expect VFR conditions. Isabel Pass, you can also expect VFR conditions. Mentasta Pass, also expect VFR conditions. Down to the Chugach Mountains, Tonita Pass, VFR conditions. Same thing for Portage Pass, VFR conditions. And then down in southeast Alaska in both Chilkoot and White Path, VFR conditions. So basically, the Brooks Range, you'll have some problems everywhere else. Looks generally VFR. Taking a look at our freezing levels for tomorrow. Freezing levels at or near the surface over that northwest Arctic coast, and then you can see sloping up to about 6,000 feet as we get on over south of the Brooks Range, down into the south central region, eventually up to 8,000 feet as we move on down to the southern panhandle. Out over the Bering Sea, the freezing levels up to 8,000 feet, and then dropping off to about 6,000 feet as we move on out to the extreme western Aleutian Islands, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, expect some isolated moderate rime icing up along the Arctic coast from the freezing level to about 14,000 feet. Then down in the southwest portion of the state, the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the eastern Aleutian Islands, isolated moderate mixed icing can be expected from the freezing level to 15,000 feet over that region. Now we'll take a look at our jet stream for tomorrow. Jet stream's coming off the Kamchatka Peninsula at about 75 knots, increasing to 95 knots as it comes south of the Aleutian Islands, and then stays at about 95 knots as we move on over to south of the Alaska Peninsula as well as on up into the Gulf of Alaska. 60-knot winds as we move on up into the central Gulf of Alaska just off the Kenai Peninsula. Comes back down south of the basically the Dixon entrance area, making landfall there at about 65 knots. Taking a look now at our 9,000-foot winds. Up along the Arctic coast with our low pressure system up there, expect about 20-knot winds circulating around that low pressure system. 20-knot winds coming across the Bering Strait, tapering off to 15 knots as we move over the mainland portion of the state. 15-knot winds as we go on out over the Alcan border, over the northeast corner of the state. If we move on back to the Bering Sea, expect 15 to 20-knot winds over this weak high pressure center over that northern central part of the Bering Sea. And then as we come on down south to where our low pressure system is, south of the Alaska Peninsula, expect 30 to 40-knot winds coming up around the low towards Kodiak Island, tapering off to 20 to 25 as it gets to Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. 20 to 30-knot winds in that eastern Bering Sea, tapering off to 15 knots as we move on out over the central Bering Sea, then about 15 to 20-knot winds over the length of the Aleutian Islands. In the Gulf of Alaska, about 20-knot winds coming up into the Gulf, tapers off as it comes over the top of the ridge there to about 10 knots. Generally pretty light winds over southeast Alaska, but then as we move on down south of the Queen Charlotte Island area, expect your winds to be about 25 knots there. Taking a look at the 3,000-foot level, with this ridge in the eastern Gulf of Alaska, generally light winds across southeast Alaska. Light winds can also be expected over the south central region and the southeast interior portion of the state, right on up into the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley. Then we have our low pressure system again up along that Arctic coast, 10 to 15-knot winds at the 3,000-foot level circulating around that to about 20 knots as we move over the eastern Arctic coast. As we get over the western Arctic coast, we see about 15-knot winds coming down there, tapering off to about 10 knots as we come down through the Norton Sound area and just east of the St. Lawrence Island region. This High pressure ridge here, expect about 10 to 15 knots around that, increasing to about 20 knots as we get out over the extreme western Bering Sea. Back over towards the Pribilof Island region in that eastern Bering Sea, expect the winds to be about 30 to 35 knots coming from Kodiak Island to the Pribilof Islands, about 20 to 25 knots across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutian Islands, to about 20 knot winds over the central Aleutian Island region around this low pressure area. And then as we take a look at our turbulence for tomorrow, generally speaking, not a lot of turbulence is expected throughout the state. You may see some light turbulence. I didn't put it on the map, but with the convective potential that we're seeing now with the summertime weather around any of those showers, be wary of turbulence associated with the showers. Otherwise, some isolated moderate turbulence from the central to eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula region. That wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Up next, see how extreme fire weather can prompt some amazing fire behavior.
They look like hundreds and thousands of fireflies coming through the air.
Any lightning strikes?
Meteorologists make predictions about what the weather in and around a wildfire is going to do. But that information alone is not enough. Firefighters need to know how the fire will react when the weather changes. How is the speed, direction, or intensity of the fire going to change? Enter the fire behavior analysts. Armed with computer modeling software, they pick up where the weather experts leave off.
Using the weather information provided from the Weather Service, we calculate what we expect the fire behavior to do.
Predicting fire weather or fire behavior is not an exact science, and even the experts are often awestruck by what a fire can do.
Fire is a very interesting critter in that it can surprise you even when you think you know everything. You have good tools to predict what it's going to do. Sometimes it will surprise you in what its capability is.
A fire can become so large and intense that it can actually generate its own local weather. The winds it creates can propel smoke, embers, and ash as high as 5 miles into the sky. As incredible a sight as that is, this one is even rarer and more awe-inspiring. The fire whirl, a tornado of fire.
Fire whirl results from instability and wind that starts spinning around in a clockwise direction. And as it spins, it sucks more and more air in at the base of the whirl.
These fiery whirlwinds can be as small as a dust devil or as big as a small tornado. A small fire whirl might be 50 feet high. A big one could extend 500 feet into the air with winds of 100 miles per hour.
Depending on the size of the whirl, the intensity of the fire, it's not uncommon to see, large pieces of sagebrush, branches from trees that are laying on the ground, those types of things be picked up and lofted through the air as a result of that intensity.
Fire whirls are definitely a sign of dangerous fire weather. Another bad sign, spotting. That's when very strong winds take embers from the main fire and send them flying through the air, where they can land on dry materials and start new fires.
You notice it more at night than you do in the daytime, but as it starts to get dark, the embers flying through the air, they look like fireflies, hundreds and thousands of fireflies, or a sparkler, the 4th of July.
It's possible for these sparks to travel a mile or more from the main fire.
I'm somewhat amazed at how fire evolves and spreads.
When extreme fire weather causes fire whirls and severe spotting, the best fire crews can do is to get out of the way fast. Once again, it's the fire weather forecasters to the rescue, alerting firefighters when these fascinating but deadly fire phenomena are likely to develop. Coming up,
we're taking a look at how we can make things better, faster.
Forecasting the future of fire weather. See what innovations are on the horizon that could make tracking the weather around a fire more precise and relevant. Wildfires can move fast, so fire weather forecasters have to keep up. In forecasting fire weather, both the small scope and the big picture are vital. And meteorologists hope to improve their predictions of both. On a small scale, right now, the computer programs that IMETs work with in the field are limited. They produce forecasts for the area around a fire, but the IMETs have to use their knowledge and experience to guess how the features of the landscape might change that forecast. But in the future, they hope to be able to create forecasts that take into account things like nearby canyons or ridges.
Research is going on every day into making finer and finer scaled weather models and weather prediction software.
Looking at the big picture, researchers are working to improve climate forecasts, with better predictions of when things like severe drought or the El Nino phenomenon can be expected. Fire agencies will know when a bad fire season is coming, so they can be ready for it.
We do pretty well out to 5 or 10 days. It would be really nice to say, this week in August, 3 months from now, it's going to be like this. Well, that would be phenomenal.
As fire weather forecasting gets better and better, wildland fires will become more predictable. That means firefighters will be safer, and more lives and homes will be protected.
This has been a co-production of and is jointly funded by the Weather Channel and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Okay, welcome back, and we'll take a look at our marine forecast, starting with southeast Alaska on Thursday. Generally pretty light winds in the central inside waters and southern inside waters, 10 to 15 knots there. Up in the Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay area, expect the winds to increase to 20 knots in the afternoon out of the south. Southern outside waters, basically all of the outside waters right on up to the east Gulf Coast, pretty much light and variable winds to some westerly component down south there. Taking a look at the area for Friday, we're going to start to see that frontal system and the changing pattern coming in. These winds, these southeast winds, 20 knots, late in the afternoon to evening hours. Most of the day is going to be relatively benign out there. Same thing along the east Gulf Coast. These winds are going to be picking up late Friday into Friday evening. Southern inside waters, expect your winds to be out of the northwest to variable 15 knots, variable 10 knots in the central inside waters, with south winds about 10 to 15 knots up through that Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area. For the south central region, generally light winds in Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots just south of the Sound, increasing to about 20 to 30 knots as we move on over towards the Barren Island region, to 25 knots south of Kodiak Island. 35-knot winds increasing late Thursday evening into Thursday night. Most of the day through Shelikof Strait, about 25-knot to 30-knot winds, but gale force by basically Thursday night. 30-knot winds in the Augustine Island area. And then in Cook Inlet, the typical afternoon sea breeze about 15 knots, otherwise generally light and variable there. Taking a look at the area for Friday, expect winds to increase to 30 knots along the North Gulf Coast right on into the Barren Island region, 25 knots south of the Kodiak Island area, northeast winds 30 knots down through Shelikof Strait, and northeast winds 15 to 20 knots coming down the Cook Inlet region. For the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the east 30 knots on the south side of the peninsula, east to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots from Bristol Bay to the north side of the western Alaska Peninsula. By Friday, winds are going to become light and variable in Bristol Bay, east to northeast winds 20 knots south of the Alaska Peninsula, with northeast winds 20 knots on the north side of the peninsula. Taking a look at the Aleutian Islands for Thursday, northeast winds about 25 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands to 20 knots as we move a little bit further to the west. North to northeast winds 20 knots over the Atka to Adak area, with northeast winds 15 knots as we get on out towards the Kiska area. And then also expect northeast winds as we move on out to 15 knots to the Shemya area. By Friday, those winds will be north 20 knots out towards Shemya, as well as over the central to western Aleutian Islands. North winds 20 knots across the central Aleutians to the eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as the eastern Aleutian Islands there, with 10 knots just south of the Dutch Harbor area. Taking a look at our Bering Sea coastal waters for Thursday, expect northeast winds 25 knots in the Pribilof Islands, north to northeast winds 20 knots around the Nunivak Island region, 25 knot winds in the St. Lawrence Island area with northeast winds 15 knots over the St. Matthew Island waters. For Friday, expect the winds to be 25 knots over the St. Lawrence Island region to the north of the Nunivak Island area to 20 knots out of the northeast over south of Nunivak Island, north winds 20 knots in the Pribilof Islands, and 15 knot northerly winds over the St. Matthew Island region. For the Arctic coastal waters on Thursday, expect your winds to be about 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound out of the northwest, dropping off to 15 knots over the western Arctic coast to 15 knots around Barrow, 15 knots over to the Prudhoe Bay Dead Horse area with southeast winds over the Kaktovik area, that extreme eastern portion of the Arctic coast out at 25 knots. For Friday, those winds will drop off to 15 knots over the extreme eastern Arctic coast, 15 knot winds as we move on over towards Barrow down to 10 knots there, 15 knot winds over the northwest Arctic coast, and then 25 to 30 knot winds over the Cape Lisburne down to outside of Kotzebue Sound out of the north. For a quick recap, taking a look at the forecast again for tonight, but also just a reminder, red flag warning for the Copper River Basin tomorrow into Friday, as well as a fire weather watch for the Matanuska Valley and the Anchorage area for Friday for strong winds with humidities dropping down about 25 to 30%. We have this low pressure system in the northeast interior or the eastern Brooks Range, some isolated thunderstorm activity in the evening hours, otherwise some rain or showers around that low pressure system, some snow showers over the western Arctic coast. Ridge of high pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, you're likely to see some fog in the outer coastal areas of southeast Alaska. With our front coming up south of Kodiak Island, expect rain across the Alaska Peninsula at the extreme portion of south portion of Kodiak Island. We're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.